When you talk about the idea of Machnas Asma Tachsisei Milchama, the king involves himself in the tactics of war. Kings don't involve themselves in tactics of war. Kings, Shalom Aleichem. Kings are busy with governance. They're busy with everything. If there's a situation where there's a war, whether they desire it or they don't desire it, so it's delegated. The king has people who are trained and skilled and experienced who engage in Milchama. But when you have a Milchamas Nitzachen, where the king understands that this war you cannot lose, so he engages himself. Machnes Atzmei B'Tachsisei Milchama. It's interesting to me. It's a takash, take of the pelle. But there's a good source for this. There's a good source for this. I think it's in the Rebbe Zayd's Rishimis. The Rebbe's father was Reb Leivik. He had Reb Leivik's father, Yehesen, the Baruch Shnei Zalman. At birth, his name was Shnei Zalman. But he married a girl whose father was also Shnei Zalman. So he wasn't Baruch. But the Zalman became Baruch Shnei. He was the Rebbe's father, Reb Leivik's father, Yehesen Shnei Zalman. But when he got married, he took the name Baruch because his Shver's name was Shnei Zalman. Anyway, the Baruch Shnei was an Adam Gadol B'Yosser. He was there, the Leivik's tate. He was an Adam Gadol B'Yosser. He was Aniyim B'nei Teva. I don't think he ever worked. The Rebbe Tamois gehalten. The Rebbe Rashavt him gave him Geld Fetzah. He was God Aghoib Nerid. Yudel Chitrik remembers him. Yudel Chitrik describes him sitting on a train, a Freilich. He was a Chassidish Yid. And he says, no, we're sitting on the train. So much a Chazar Amayim Chassidus. So we got a Maimon Chassidus, I say, off the top of their heads. See Chazar Amayim Chassidus. It waits 15 minutes. Nu was sitting on the train. Chazar Amayim Chassidus. The Leivik's father, the Baruch Shnei. He was in Lubavitch quite a bit. He got married a second time in Lubavitch. He was very close to the Rebbe Rashab. He was older than they were first cousins. They were first cousins. First cousins once removed. They're very close. It was Adam Gadol. And I believe he wrote the Rishimis. He wrote a journal which he gave the Friedrich Rebbe that's been published. The Rishimis Haravash, you could buy it. It's very, very interesting. And very interesting. There's mentions of the Rebbe as a little boy. And one of the most interesting part of this Rishim is a description of what the Rebbe Rashab was saying during World War I. There's some very interesting details over there that are not printed anyplace else. He was in the house by the Rebbe Nishmaseiden, and he heard things and he wrote them all down that are not in Teres Shalom, they're not printed anyplace else. But one of the things that I think it's written there, I'm not sure. My memory is not what it was. I think it's there that the Rebbe Rashab said, the Russians were fighting with the Germans on the Eastern Front. The Rebbe did not want the Germans to overrun Russia. He wanted Russia to remain Russian. In other words, anti-Semitic, but frum. He certainly did not want Russia to become communist, but at that time that was not on the table. He didn't want the Germans to defeat the Russians. He wanted the Russians to win. The same thing with Alter Rebbe and Napoleon. You can read the Lashenis and the Sichas. So the Rebbe Rashab said, I hope the king himself will get involved in the tactics of war. The king hastened Nikolai. And he was an inbred fool. He was a typisch kolatipshin. What was gewusst? People knew he was a fool. And Mistama, the Rebbe Rashab also knew. And the Rebbe Rashab says, I hope he gets involved in the war. And he explained why. Not because he's smarter than the generals, but he brings along a bigger malach. And the Rebbe says, I hope he'll get involved in the war, he'll bring a bigger malach, and there'll be an opportunity, a chance, that the Russians will defeat the Germans. Now the end of the story was he got involved, and they lost anyway. But this word that the Rebbe Rashab said, I hope the Kesed, the Tsar, gets involved in the Milchama, because he brings a bigger malach. He's the melech. So this is a mashal gashmi for Havl and Klipel, Havl Elf Avdolas, Machnes es Atzmei B'Tachsisei Milchama. The Rabbeim, the Friedrich Rebbe and the Rebbe. The Rebbe Tamol gesagt of sich, the Friedrich Rebbe said out himself, Karmi Shalila Natarti. You know, Karmi Shalila, you know the Shir HaKerem. In Sefer Yeshaya, there's a shir, a poem. It's one of the Asara Shirim. From Yeshaya HaNavi. And it's a story about a man who has a kerem. He has a vineyard. and you have to be misakel, you have to remove the stones, and you have to remove the weeds, and you have to take care of the kerem. And he's busy taking care of somebody else's. He's going off to find somebody else's problems and he's fixing them. And his own kerem, he neglects his own vineyard. He neglects his own kerem. So it's a mashal. The mashal is was geist the zuchem bayenim psheit atz b'chatchila ach kach psheit acheder. This is it's the beginning of Yeshaya. It's a nevuah where Yeshaya Hanavi is describing the Baal HaKerem, and he's supposed to be looking after his own Kerem, and instead he's busy helping everybody else. And Karem Yishalei Netati. The Frierdiker Rebbe said of himself, Karem Yishalei Netati. I'm a Chabad Rebbe. And Chabad Rebbe is supposed to speak Chabad Chassidus. A Chabad Rebbe is supposed to speak Avedas Hashem al derech Chabad. Und mit was vernehm sich mit Mikvetare, mit Tenekish Beis Rabban. What was he busy? He was busy with those things that should have been done by Balabatim, should have been done by Rabbonim, but not by the Rebbe. But this was the Tzav HaShah. This is what the hour required, and this is what the Rebbe did. This is Mamish the Machnes Atme B'Tachsis Muhammad. But let's talk about America, because that's what's near to us. The Rebbe came here, the Frierdiker Rebbe came here, the Rebbe came here. Mit was hat sich vernommen? What was the Frierdiker Rebbe busy with? He was busy with talks and tales, mit Schmussen, mit Kinder und Jugend, with magazines for little children. He was busy with Unser Buch, to teach children how to read and write in Yiddish. He was busy with the Rebbe wrote a curriculum. Our Rebbe wrote a curriculum. They found it. They printed a curriculum, grade 1 till grade 8, a curriculum, what the children should learn in the first grade, what the children should learn, a whole curriculum. The Rabbeim haben sich hereingelegt in Sachen, was sie bechlauen nicht gewinnt sehr in America especially. The Frierdiker Rebbe, who Gufe was unbelievably inhibited, Begashmis, he was so limited, came to this country, and I heard from people who remember, the moment he rolled off that ship, he didn't give himself a second to catch his breath. He was stutterming, he had no people, and had no money, and no connections, and no nothing. Aber er hat getummelt. America has to be what the old country was. Yiddish, first of all, the only thing that matters is Yiddishkeit. And second of all, besides for Yiddishkeit, there's nothing. That was his dream, that was his vision, his wish. And he busied himself with Tenekish Beis Rabban. The Frierdiker Rebbe got involved with the Chinuch of little kids. You know how many kids were in the whole of Lubavitch Yeshiva? They fit in one picture against the far wall of the upstairs of 70. 25 kids, 30 kids, and that's what he did. The Frierdiker Rebbe, right? He said Chassidus, didn't say Chassidus. He said a little Chassidus. But what was he doing in America? He's worrying about the Chinuch of Tenekish Beis Rabban. And you read the stories, and you hear the anecdotes, you hear what happened. One Sunday morning, he says, one Sunday morning, the Frierdiker Rebbe called in the Manal of the yeshiva and said, I want you to go to the Talmidim and ask each Talmud to give you an hour-by-hour account what they did from the time they left yeshiva Friday afternoon until they came yeshiva Sunday morning. That's 12 hours, it's 24 hours, and another 12 hours, and another 8 hours. It's 36 plus 8 is 44. They should give an hour-by-hour reckoning. Was dem Agital for the Amerikaner Beitschikis. You understand? Friday afternoon, we played baseball. Friday night, we had a good bull session. Shabbos Bam Tish, he wanted an hour-by-hour account of what they did. And it wasn't beautiful. And every boy had to write a duch, and the Rebbe wanted to see it. Now, the Rebbe didn't make any comments. He didn't have to make any comments. He just said to the Rosh Yeshiva, next weekend, see to it that their hours are spent more responsive. Imagine the Frierdiker Rebbe, and you're not talking about a yeshiva with 1,000 kids. It was 12 boys. 20, but it was nothing. But he put himself into these little kinderlach because the Rebbe understood that the future of America depends on this. Tashbat, Tenekish Beis Rabban. And the idea that the Rabbeim spent exorbitant amounts of time and koiches on things that traditionally were done by a malamed adiki, a school teacher. The Rebbe himself was concerned with these things. The Rebbe said once in the Farbrengen, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, or he said to someone, I cannot go to sleep until they put the talks and tales into the mail for a boy in Australia. There's a Yid who lives in Yerushalayim, and his name is Uri Kaplun. He is a grandson of Vitig Hasen, the Mesha Zalman Feglim of Hashem, who the Rebbe called the Avram Avinu of Australia. So Uri Kaplun wrote a biography of his grandfather. It's called Avram Avinu. It's a beautiful book, and he writes nicely. It's in English. It's a good read. It's really worthwhile. It's such a remarkable story. You read it, you don't even see how remarkable it is. So Uri Kaplun writes that the Rebbe said in the Farbrengen once that the Frierdiker Rebbe said he cannot go to sleep till they put in the mail one issue of Talks and Tales to one boy in Australia. And Rabbi Kaplun writes, I know that story is true because I was that boy. He was a little boy. This is the late 30s, the early 40s, I'm sorry. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said that you put in the mail the Talks and Tales for the one kid in Australia who was going to read Jewish kosher literature rather than the Treifa literature the older children were reading. And the Rebbe said, the dedication of the Rabbeim to things that are bechlal not in Yonam, because this is the Taich Machnus Asmat and the Rebbe. You should know for every story we know, there's 100 stories we do not know. The Rebbe was not a makif. The more you hear, the more you can't believe it. The Rebbe was involved in the shlichusen of individual shluchim on a day-to-day basis, not only in the 50s and 60s, in the 70s and 80s. The Rebbe was involved in the decision that small shluchim in small shtetl made, and mamish on a day-to-day basis. He showed an interest, and he engaged a small shliach in a small shtetl, made a Shabbos. The Rebbe wanted to know about it, and he read about it, and he asked questions about it. And we're slowly hearing, not the big stories we know, but the idea that the Rebbe concerned himself with the individual activities of a particular shliach in a tiny place, because to the Rebbe, this was Muhammad's Nitzachim. And there was nothing too small. There was nothing too small for the Rebbe to personally engage in. Now I want to talk to something. Okay, this is a Chassidish Farbrengen. And God should forgive me for saying something which is very terrible. I actually did that terrible thing. I prepared what I want to talk about, okay? And I want to talk about Chinuch. I want to spend a few minutes talking about Chinuch. The Rabbeim, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe were Meisei Nefesh for Chinuch. Were mamish Meisei Nefesh for Chinuch. The amount of time the Rabbeim gave to this. The story with Tzivos Hashem, where for years the Rebbe would meet kids as often as once a month and stand in shul while all the kids were playing around them, like, come on, David, and talk to them like as if they're soldiers in an army, and they're all listening, and some of the kids are sitting in the front and trying to write what the Rebbe says. The other kids don't know what's flying. And the Rebbe for Tzivos Hashem. Mamish, in the early years of Tzivos Hashem, the Rebbe met the children once a month, and he talked to them. The kids weren't listening, but the Rebbe was talking to them. And the Rebbe obviously understood that they're hearing, the neshama had. The Rebbe was so concerned with Chinuch. So I want to speak to Chinuch for a few minutes. I want to speak to Chinuch because if you want to talk about the Rebbe, and I guess you could say this true also the Frierdiker Rebbe, in the Inyanim of Yikoch, the things which were the most important to the Rabbeim. The Rebbe should have been busy. The Rebbe told once the Bela eunuch, "Mein Inyan is faren for Nashven and Rambam." The Rebbe said, "My business is to faren for Nashven and Rambam." He did that also, but that he did like Ibein Haimish Besoyim. You understand? Between his Iker and Yoneh, which was concerning himself with Aleph Beis, Mamish Kipshute with Aleph Beis, and Kometz Alefah, and Mikveh Tar, and Chinuch Ataras HaKodesh. I want to speak about Chinuch. The Rebbe gave so much time to the idea of Chinuch. Chinuch meant Hodem and Yiddish Kinder. You have to raise your children. And it's something which Bichlal is always a topic that should be talked about. The Rebbe talked about always Simchas Torah, he talked about always on Shavuos, but it's an appropriate topic about Yud Shvat. Chinuch and Yiddish Kinder. It's something that has to be said and has to be said and has to be said and has to be said. The Nakud is as follows. In the old country, the street raised your child. The street in the shtetl was so pure that the street raised your child. A Yiddish kid grew up in a Jewish home. He walked outside in the street, all he saw was Kiddush and Tana. By his neighbor, by his friend, by his family. So the involvement of the parents, and even the involvement of the Melamed, did not have to be with such attention to detail, because the child was surrounded by Kiddush and Tara. The child was surrounded by everything holy. The street was holy. I've heard that there's places in Eretz Yisrael where it's like that now, or it used to be like that. But it's not that way here. The Rebbe spoke about this many, many times. In America, the street is treif redt man nicht. Was tut sich in Stub, you know what I'm saying? The street is not kosher, we all understand. And we send our children to school, and they're sitting on the bus, and they're sitting in classrooms. The tests that the children face, and the hardships that the children deal with, the exposure to all kinds of tests that in the shtetl simply did not exist. And the answer to this, Rabbi say, the answer to this is very intense chinuch. Now, everybody is very worried about the children's mental health, and it's a good thing. Children have to be mentally healthy. And we're so worried about their self-esteem, and worried about them being happy. And too many of us are afraid to say a word. And the kids grow up, and they're spoiled. They're nachigebene. And they have a lot of self-esteem. But self-esteem doesn't necessarily mean that they have good self-image. It means they have a lot of chutzpah sometimes. They're very selfish. It's very important that our children should be healthy. I'm not saying that you can abuse children, but we have to raise them. And raising children means we can't assume that they'll figure anything out by themselves. A child does not know how to wash negelvas unless you show him. A child does not know how to say meidani unless you show him. A child doesn't know that when he comes out of the bathroom, he has to say Ashayotzar unless you teach him. And a lot of times, we just assume they know. Why? I know, so of course he knows. It's not so. Children know nothing. And children need to be taught everything. And it's so critical for parents to approach the chinuch of their children with a sense of, the truth is, unbelievable urgency, unbelievable intensity, but if you show urgency and intensity, you'll make your kids crazy. So you have to keep that all inside. But there needs to be the idea that you pay attention to every little detail. And every child at a different age is in a position to learn different things. And different children age differently. If you can't bring your child to shul because they can't sit still, you don't bring your child to shul. When the child is able to come to shul, there's an expectation. He sits next to his father and he davens. He listens to Kriyas Torah. And you together with your Balabatim. It's not a 2-man job. It's a 100-man job. But this is for sure. If you're not going to, you and your wife are not going to agree about Chinuch, it's going to be a disaster. Midaf hodev in the kinder. The simple statement is, the children are not going to be elech and frum because they're living in an elech and a frum kehila. I am sorry. Our children are going to be elech and frum because we demonstrate to them that we personally care very much that the little details of Yiddishkeit are important. A child is playing and his yarmulke falls off. You don't have to scream at the kid. You don't have to hit the child. But the child has to know that you care. That his yarmulke fell off his head. He'll never forget it. Kol yemei chayav. It's a little thing. A child walks by his friend, and his friend has a bag of chips, and he gets permission from his friend. He puts his hand into the bag, he pulls out 3 chips, and he pops them into his mouth, and he doesn't make a bracha. It's a little thing. And again, you don't want to get upset, you don't want to get angry, but you want to be mesim lev. The Eibishter gives us children, gesundheit, and we should know how big a bracha it is. It's the biggest bracha in the universe, the biggest bracha in the world is children. It takes us our whole lifetime until we're out of pfeifers, was kennen nicht gehen, kennen nicht reden, kennen nicht trachten, to see, das ist ein game. Jüdischer Reichtum ist nicht Heiser und Geld. Jüdischer Reichtum ist Kinder und Kindskinder. The greatest bracha we have is the children the Eibishter gives us. And we have to raise them. We must teach them how to be Jewish. We must teach them how to be Jewish. Each child at each step of his development, parents, a father and a mother together, they sit and they think it through. They try different things with the child. You try something with your child, like you say to the child, take negelwasser, and then you see that the child is not old enough because he spills it out. So you wait 3 months and you try again. But every step of the way, we raise our children. We show our children how to daven by example. We take them to shul. Shul is not a playground so mothers could sleep Shabbos morning. I'm sorry for speaking divrei kfira. This is how I believe. If a kid can't sit still in shul, in my opinion, he stays home. And you say to your little boy and little girl, this is an idea that I tell many people, and it's a simple fact of life. The way Chinuch works is that everything you tell your child is at an age where he doesn't need to know it yet. In other words, just like you hear the tradition that a boy is 2, 3, 4 years old and his mother tells him that when you're going to be a big boy, you're going to go to yeshiva and you're going to become a Talmid Chacham. And the kid tells, I'm going to be a Talmid Chacham. He has no idea what the Torah is. He has no idea what a Talmid Chacham is. But his mother told him he's going to be a big boy. He's going to go to yeshiva, a Talmid Chacham. And he's already in his own imagination a Talmid Chacham. And his mother sings to him, like the Rabbi used to say by the Farbrengen, Torah is the best eschere. The Rabbi used to give an example for this idea that minig is all Torah. So one of the examples that I would bring is that the mother used to sing to the children lullabies. Torah is the best eschere. Every stage in Chinuch is about you teaching your children what they need to know before they need to know it. Meet Lamashal. You have a little maid there, and she needs to learn about tznius, which is a big nisayon. You don't tell her about tznius when she's 9, when she's 2.5, when she's 3. That you're going to grow up and you're going to be as pretty as Queen Esther, and you're going to wear clothing like Queen Esther, because you're a Yiddish Meidele, and a Yiddish Meidele needs to dress tznius, and she quells from nachas. Oh, I'm going to be Queen Esther. And when she becomes a little older and it becomes a real issue, it's already in her mind established that this is how she is. And here's the key. There's no fight. There's no fight. When parents are raising their children and they're fighting with them, they already missed the boat. If you want your child to listen to Kriyas HaTorah, the Moshe, and he doesn't want to, the reason is because you introduced him to Kriyas HaTorah when he needed to listen to Kriyas HaTorah. That's not how it goes. You don't tell a child you're going to shul when he's the age of going to shul. You tell him he's going to shul 2 years before. And you say, when you're going to be big, and you're going to be able to sit next to your father, you're going to sit next, you can go to shul, and you can sit next to Tati, and Tati's going to have a siddur, and you're going to have a siddur, and Tati's going to daven, and you're going to daven. And when the child is old enough to go to shul, he goes to shul because he knows about shul from an age where he had no resistance. He had no fight, he had no issue with it. So when he becomes of age, it's a natural progression. He goes to shul. And the same is true in every Indian. You want your child to listen to Kriyas HaTorah, you don't tell him, from now on, listen to Kriyas HaTorah. No. You tell him before. You think you listen to Kriyas HaTorah? Let's try. You can't go outside for Kriyas HaTorah, you come back from Muslim. And in a month from now, when you'll be big, you'll listen to Kriyas HaTorah. I'll give you an example which is a bit uncomfortable, but it's also a very, very real example. Today, a lot of parents struggle with taking their children to the mikveh, the boys, to the mikveh. How do you take your boy to the mikveh? You tell him before. Not when he's old enough to go to the mikveh. He knows before he's going to be big, he's going to be like Tati, he's going to go to the mikveh. And then when he becomes that age, it's not a pashat. He already hears about it, he knows about it, he understands what it is to some extent, and he goes to the mikveh. Every stage in Chinuch is this way. And when the kids get older, they become adolescents, they become teenagers after bar mitzvah, it's the same thing. Whatever you need your children to know, they hear about in their home before. In other words, it's a lakus bepshitus, it's bepashtus. But in order for this to happen, you and your wife have to consider the most important thing in your life, the chinuch of your children. But if this is how I describe it. Every family, every mishpacha, shtub, every home has a conversation that goes on from the moment the couple gets married until till days. This conversation is to a great extent, certainly in the earlier years of a marriage, steered by the parents. What you talk about when you're in a car going to a trip, what you talk about at your Shabbos table, when you talk about that the Shabbos, a regular weeknight dinner is a conversation that parents need to direct. And parents need to always not make it so intense that the children feel stifled. You talk about regular things, talk about fun things, and so on and so forth. But the parents always go back to Inyanim of Yerushalayim. At every opportunity, the children hear about Frumkeit. And they, like I said before, they don't hear about the Frumkeit they need to know now. They hear about the Frumkeit they need to know tomorrow. So when they become that age, it's a davar apashet. This is called Chinuch. And Chinuch is a responsibility. And the Chinuch doesn't happen by mistake. You don't raise good kids because you had mazel. Everybody needs Siyata D'Shmaya. We need Siyata D'Shmaya Onishen on a breg. But one of the biggest mistakes you could say is it's not up to me. It's absolutely up to you. It's not up to you only, but it's up to you. So when you're raising your children, you and your wife have to make it ikr kala ikrim at every opportunity that the children should know what's the most important thing to you. You should know, I have a grievance against my father. What's the grievance? When I was a kid, I wanted to go on trips. We always went on trips. Like, it's basically Chalamay Sukkis, Chalamay Pesach, 2:30, 3 o'clock. The zoo closes at 5. The trip is an hour. We left house 2 o'clock. What's our trip at Mishingahat? Everybody else was out of the house at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we were Rekayim Mitzvah Shlep, B'deraisim, B'derabbonin, like all the Shittas, B'hidde. I remember once supposed to go on a trip. My father sat down to learn Tanya. And I was so angry with him. But he learned his Tanya and he finished his Tanya, and I was angry. I probably physically pushed him, so he wanted to go over me. Anyway, I said, we're finally ready to go on the trip. He said, learn Tanya. So he told me straight, it's important for you to know that it's not that important. That's what he told me. Now, I'm not saying you should do that to your children. I'm not saying the children is a different generation. The children are much more sensitive. I'll get sued for being mentioned. But this is chinuch. Chinuch means father and mother know. It's good that the children should wear nice clothes. It's good that the children should eat good food. It's good that the children should have a beautiful bedroom and they should have nice things and everything like that. But it's not as important. It's not nearly as important as Teirah and Mitzvahs and Yiras Shamayim. And this we give our children in every minute of our day and our night. We give it to them in our words. We give it to them in our actions. We give it to them in our attitude. When the children see our Yiras Shamayim. I grew up with a mother who on average benched 2 or 3 times after each meal. She drank a cup of water. Did I make a ben nefashos? She made 1 ben nefashos, 2 ben nefashos. That's how I grew up. I also make ben nefashos 2 or 3 times after a cup of water. It's a big aveda. I'm like a baruch shein. But this is what I remember. The earnestness and the seriousness of Yiddishkeit. We live in America, and Baruch Hashem, we're not living in America in the 1940s and even the 1950s and 60s. I'll tell you a story. I think it's a Gavaldik Hamaisa. It's a long, detailed story, and I'm telling the whole story to pick on one little nuance. The story is that once a month, every month for maybe 30 years, or close to 30 years, the Anhala of the yeshiva would go into the Rebbe Yechidus on the Shchedish. The Rashag, who was the Rebbe Shvagir, would go into the Rebbe together with Anhala Gashmis and Ruchnis and talk in Yoni HaYeshiva. Once every 4 months, they would be joined by the Anhala from Montreal. Who was the Anhala from Montreal? The Peilishe, Rabbi Kramer Alav Shalom, Rabbi Hendel Alav Shalom, Rabbi Ginas Alav Shalom, and I think the Peilishe, Nishderush. So they came to Montreal first. They were the Anhala. Every 4 months, when the Anhala went into the Rebbe, they would also go in. So one day, Rabbi Hendel walks into the Beis Medrash. It's a Shchedish, and he goes up to Simcha Zirkin, who was unfortunate now all of Shalom, and he says to him, "You got to take us to New York." If you know Simcha Zirkin, you don't tell him what to do. He says, I don't have to do anything. He says, "No, we have to go." Why? He tells him the truth, that every 4 months, Anhala from Montreal joins Anhala from New York, go into the Rebbe. We have a regular driver, and the driver got sick. We need to get to New York now. So he negotiated. I'm sure he took good care of himself, whatever the negotiations were. Maybe it wasn't financial. He made sure that he got something for it, and he took him. Anyway, they come to New York. The Yechida starts at 9 and it goes till 10. It's an hour. Simcha Zirkin is sitting in Gan Eden HaTachna on a bench, on an old wooden bench. Those wooden benches were made for one reason. For those who don't remember the old benches of 770, they would push it, splinters glued together, waiting to be unsplintered into your Huizen. The whole bench was splinters. I have a lot of stories with those splinters. 770 benches. It's part of the history of 770 was the splinters. It's very important. You had to get a shtech from 770. Anyway, he's sitting on one of those benches. The door opens and Hella walks out. All of them. And he goes to his car. He has to drive back to Montreal. As soon as they walk out of the Rabbi, he sees there's something's not right. Anyway, they go on 770, they get into the car. Rabbi Handel's sitting in the front. I think it was maybe just three, Gringlas and Kramer and Handel, maybe just three. And they're sitting in the back, and no one says a word. Not only no one says a word, they don't want to make eye contact. They don't want to look at each other. Anyway, Simcha Zirkin is driving. It's a long trip. And no one says a word because then. Anyway, after 2 hours of driving, he pulls into a rest stop and he parks the car and he says, Hetz Chaim Yidin. I'm going out of the car to the Beis HaKovid. I just want you to know that if you're going to sit like this for the next 6 hours, you're going to sit in this parking lot, I'm not taking you. I can't take this. What's this business? They're sitting in the car. They're not only not changing words. They're not making. It's like as if you have 3 corpses, 3 cadavers. Anyway, he goes to what he has to. He comes back and says, "Sitzen." He sits down and there's "Nein da fuhren." He says, "Nein befuhrt nicht. We're not moving." Anyway, so after a long time, Rabbi Handel says, "Fuhr, ich kann dich nicht sagen. Go, I'll tell you." So they go in and Handel tells them what happened. They went into the Rebbe, had a Yechidus, and at some point the Yechidus, there was quite a few Anhola members. I don't know how many it was, I don't know who they were. But somebody in the Anhola started to speak with the Rebbe politics. What that means, for those who don't understand what politics means favoritism. A Rebbe is a Lakus. And a Rebbe is in charge. And a Rebbe, you do exactly what he says. And a Rebbe, you don't give advice. He was giving the Rebbe advice. Why was he giving the Rebbe advice? He had an interest. He either liked somebody or didn't like somebody. So he was sort of explaining to the Rebbe that the Rebbe really wants to do what he thinks. And it wasn't the first time that the Rebbe was given eitzes like this. So the Rebbe interrupts him. Doesn't let him finish. And the Rebbe said, "Bechlau, bin ich sich mishtarol zu führen sich als Rebbe Dishver." So I tried to do everything like the Rebbe Dishver, the feeling the Rebbe did. My whole approach to Messias is I follow the way the Rebbe behaved, that's how I behaved. He says, in 3 ways I'm different than the feeling Rebbe. In 3 Wegen bin ich ein Rebbe Dishver. He says, number 1, ich hab Geld. Feeling Rebbe had no money. He says, if I need, I can have, this is the 1970s, early 70s. I can have tonight on this table $5 million in cash. Als ich darf, habe ich Geld, the Rebbe said. Number 2, der Rebbe de Schwer hat gewollt machen von Amerika am Mokum Tere. Und hat es nicht sicher gewesen zu sein. Ich bin das ja sicher zu sein. The Friedrich Rebbe wanted America to be a place of Torah. Not a place where people learn Torah, a place of Torah. And he did not merit to see it. I see it. And then the Rebbe says, when the Rebbe de Schwer gehat mit them in Zereden, ich habe from Zereden. The Friedrich Rebbe had people they could talk to, meaning they would not. You learned Rambam today, yeah? Today we start Hilchas Ritzeach, right? There's 2 mitzvahs in Hilchas Ritzeach, which again call it Kula. Leisechel al Adam. What's the second one? There's the evil sit in Michshon. Nicht verdrehen in Makop. The Shveriga had mentioned you can speak to people and they're not going to have days, they're just going to listen. I have no one to talk to. And that's how the Yechidus ended. That was the end. That was the Seit Pasuk. So that's why they walked out like that. So the Rebbe said 3 things. The Rebbe had no money and I have money. The Rebbe wanted to see America as a Makam Teda. He wasn't zeichet to see it and I'm zeichet to see it. And the Rebbe had people to talk to and I didn't. Now, everybody tells the story. The most important part of the story is the punchline. But I don't think so. The second part. The Rebbe de Shvat had gewollt sein as America sein a Makam Teda und hat nicht zeichet gewinnt zu sein. I want to explain to you the Pnimius Shabbat David. This is, it's important. It's not negate the Chinuch, but it's important. People learned Teda in America. And there were goyim in America in the 1910s and 1920s that are bigger than many of the Rosh Hashivas today. People learned Teda. But America was not a Mokum Teda. And the people who studied Teda were not B'nai Teda. They were students. Almost every yeshiva in America, almost every yeshiva, not saying all, Bachim sat and learned, and they prepared themselves to go to college. It was an accepted part of the yeshiva life. There were two types of yeshivas. The yeshivas that were college prep, the Jews not college prep, but the Rubam Kakulam, the way a yeshiva bacher looked. A yeshiva bacher did not look like a yeshiva bacher. He looked like an American who's studying Talmud. This was true not just in the 40s. It was even true in the 50s, and it was even true in the 60s. Meaning to say there was a lot of yeshivas, there was a lot of Teda, but it was America. The way people saw themselves, even people who were B'nai Teda, it's different than in Europe. It's a subject, it's a limud, it's a academic thing. The idea, you know what they call in the culture, the black hat. What's the black hat? What's the black hat? The black hat is Yeshnei Am Echad. I am different. Yeshnei I'm different, we're different. The black hat in the 50s and the 60s, you had people who sat and learned all day and all night, but they looked like Americans because they were Americans. The idea that we're not Americans, we're Yidden, took a very long time to break through. In the 70s, you began to see, today, wherever you look, Charedim and Charedim, Yidden are frum, Yidden are ehrlich, and to a very great extent, Mahad de Welt and Bud, Mamish. Me pfeift of the ganze Welt. Our life is Teda, our life is Yira, we have Nisyonis. Und der bist helfen. But we're Yidden l'chatchila. It wasn't that way even in the 60s. You began to see all over America that the yeshiva bacher doesn't just study Teda, he looks like a yeshiva bacher. And he thinks like a yeshiva bacher. Thinking like a yeshiva bacher means my business is Teda. Do I have to work to support my family? Maybe I have to work. My life is Teda. Rather than this is something that I'm doing for a year or for 2 or for 3, but in a way that's part of a life that has other priorities, other interests. This is what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe de Shvat had gewollt sein Amerika and Makam Teda. The Friedrich Rebbe saw yeshiva bachrim. But the Rebbe wanted what we call a lakus b'pshitas. The Rebbe wanted the attitude of ha'el chayid is kehem chayim. My life is Teda v'aveda. It took a long time for frume yidden, elach yidden, charede yidden, to stop needing to be in both worlds, to stop needing to please America. It's a long time ago. It's 50 years ago, it's 60 years ago, it's 70 years ago. But it took a long time for Fruma Yidden to say, I don't care what America thinks. I'm a Yid and this is it. And that's what the Rebbe meant. When he said, the Rebbe de Shvat, the Rebbe gewollt sein, Amerika sein, Amokum Teda, or it is nicht Zeichen gewesen zu sein. In the early 70s, he says, Ich bin der Zeichen sein. And I think he meant then. Wherever you look, there's Teda, and it's Teda v'Yira. It's not Teda with cheshbonus. It's real. It's real Teda. I'm sorry, I digressed. Okay, we want to raise our children like this. We want to raise our children that this is, our whole life is Teda and Yiddishkeit, Chassidus. And we have to understand that it's not going to happen by itself. I davened for many, many years by the police station. Rabbi Reuben, he lived on Montgomery here. And he was an interesting Jew. He was a Yid caught in a time warp. He could have lived in Sanz, the time of the Derech Chaim, would have been very comfortable. He was a very interesting Yidl. And I spent a lot of time with him. He was very nice to me. We spent a lot of hours schmoozing. And he was telling me once, he was complaining. Chinuch. The Hodev and the Kinder. We give our children what's important to us. And And for some parents, what's important to us, they should have a lot of fun. Why? Because they feel like when they were children, they didn't have any fun. For some parents, they give their children that they shouldn't be stressed out by school. Why? Because when they were children, they were stressed out by school. Some parents, everybody has their cheshbonis, right? My children are not going to go through what I went through. Everybody says that, and they end up being worse than their parents. But that's a detail, yeah? My children are not going to, fine, your children do not have to go, but that doesn't exempt you from raising them. You don't raise Jewish children by protecting them from abuse. You have to protect them from abuse. And you have to raise them. And raise them means you have to teach them. You have to teach them Yiddishkeit. At every stage, the most important part of the teaching is you and your wife's own conduct. The most important part of the teaching is they see how Shabbos looks. And they see how Pesach looks. And they see what it means, Daled Minim. They see what it means, the Sukkah. They see how important these things are to you. They see what a hechsher is. You know what it means? You eat any food, you go into any restaurant, it's kosher. The children learn from what we teach them. The Rebbe said this many, many times. America is different than the old country. You cannot expect your children to learn anything by themselves. You have to teach them everything. And you have to do it with that name, with that shalom. Parents, even teachers, but parents for sure, it has to be all love. All love. But you can't not say it because they don't know how they're going to take it. And I'm telling you, the real truth about Chinuch is everything you want your child to know tomorrow, you tell them today. If you come to, people come to me all the time, Rabbi, my kid is 13, he doesn't want to daven in shul. Of course he doesn't daven. I can't say to the guy, I don't want to hurt his feelings. He says, of course not, you never spoke to him about davening in shul. The child hears about shul when he's so young, it's not even a question he should go. And then when he's able to go, it's a special thing, get to shul. It's a special thing, it's a Bakis. This is Chinuch. Rabbi says it's an achrayas. It's an achrayas, the moment, this is the fact of life. Okay, I'll tell you what the facts of life are. I do this for a living. I say this speech every day, again and again. I don't have to have any speeches. Yeah, a bacha goes to yeshiva, a girl goes to yeshiva, she doesn't have a clue what life is. She doesn't have a clue. A boy gets married, a girl gets married, they still have a clue what life is. And then the Eibishter blesses them, they bring a child into the world. That's it. Life's over. That's it, finished. You're never, ever done parenting. From the time your first child is born, I'd say kol aderes, you're a father, you're a mother, you're teaching. You're teaching by example. And if you have to grow up in order to do it, you have to grow up in order to do it. But you have to teach your children Yiddishkeit. 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 What does the Rebbe care about? The Rebbe is very happy when your children all match. It's beautiful. The picture says, the Rebbe is very happy that your children are going after school to learn music and to learn dance and to learn art and to learn exercise. And I'm not saying that these are bad things. But das ist nicht negeya. The Rebbe cares that the children should hear that the most important thing in their home and for their father and for their mother and therefore for them is Torah mitzvahs, Yiddishkeit. It's not complicated. It's really not complicated. I spoke last summer for a group of people. They came to the oil, and they invited me to speak to them. These people had lists of shopping. I need a chatan, and I need a kala, I need a panasan, I need a kaparan, I need a alle gute Sachen. They had a list of, everyone had a list of all the things that's from the Rebbe, and it works. People come to the oil for one simple reason. It works. If it didn't work, they wouldn't come. People come, all kinds, lahav goyim. People come to the Rebbe day and night. The oil is full of people. They're coming there. Some people come because they want to be connected. But the Rubam Kakulam, you come when something is bothering you. Or mevet geholfen. You listen to WhatsApps. Mevet geholfen. If they weren't geholfen, they wouldn't come again. So I had this whole Farbrengen with these people. It was a nice Farbrengen. I put it up online in case you don't know who I am. Inside Chasidus.org. Please check me out. At the end of the drasha, I said, listen, you're all here because you have needs. And here's a holy Yidak, Grace Tzaddik, who the God emes it is so not in your world. You know, the Rebbe said in the first Maimed, B'chlal nish be'erech haverecho b'teiro b'mitzvahs. In the first Maimed, Bechlal nish be'erecha chaverecha b'teiru b'mitzvahs. There's a ged in halacha called chaverecha b'teiru b'mitzvahs. Recheach techiachas hamisachas chaverecha b'teiru b'mitzvahs. Am she'itcha b'teiru b'mitzvahs. You are coming to a yid that has no chiyav ha'echocha. He has no obligation to give you musir if you don't do a mitzvah, because he's not chaverecha b'teiru b'mitzvahs. He lives in a different stratosphere, a different universe. And you come to him wegen was kommt man zu ihm? Wegen Parnasse, wegen gesund, wegen Archove, wegen noch Sachen. They're very important things. And the Rebbe is a nice man. He's good. I heard that somebody once complained to the Rebbe that the Rebbe is different than the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe was very, very warm. And the Rebbe was very malchusdik. I mean, whatever, this lump, this is beidem, nit negir. Someone very close to the Rebbe, who was, he was a friend, said to the Rebbe that the Chassidim feel that the Rebbe is a little bit distant. And the Rebbe, without hesitating, said to him, Reiv teva ein yachel makabel. You're complaining. Do you know what I'm giving you? I'm giving you so much good, you don't even know what to do with it. The Rebbe said to him. He complained to the Rebbe said, the Agazundit, Reiv teva, and you have no idea how much the Rebbe gives. I mean Gashmias, Parnasa, Gesund, Nachas, Kinder. Kinder! Der Rebbe gibt Kinder, wie Menschen Etemen. Kinder! Aber ich habe Kinder, und man kommt, und der Eberste Bench, und hat ihn gelernt, ich meine, die Welt darf untergehen. So I said to these people, what does he want? Everybody came here with a laundry list. Everybody has a whole list of needs. And they're good needs. Just do him a favor. Do it. He's a nice Rebbe. He doesn't give brachas conditionally. He never did and never will. The Rebbe doesn't make conditions. And when the Rebbe makes a condition, it's not because he wants to be difficult. It's because he's, like the Rebbe said once, I'm telling you the reason this person is sick. You want the child to have a recovery, you have to start keeping kosher. It's not a deal. It's not tishkan handlerai. It's not conditional. It's not a mekach. The Rebbe geht zist. Aber wir können ihm geben etwas, was will. The Rebbe's whole metzias is that we should be a little more ehrlich. That we should raise our children with a little bit more of the value of America is nicht anders. America is nicht anders is our life is Yiddishkeit from beginning to the end and everything in between. Man darf verstehen. We're living in America. We're Charedim. We're Frume Yidden. Baruch Hashem. And there are many of us. Frume Ehrliche Yidden. As the Eibush that they go home. Hashem God Almighty bless them. And they're quite well to do. We're not poor. We're not everybody in the Lubavitch, not even in America is a Malamed. Do you understand? The Yidden was verdienen sehr schön. And they want to enjoy the material bounty that the Eibush gave them. And they're entitled. Kosher vadit, kosher, it's honest. But it's never allowed to be to the extent, like it says in the Pasuk, Shamanta avisa kasisa. Shamanta avisa kasisa. Me wird fett, me wird dick. And you trample on the whole business. Yiddishkeit, parents have to understand that we want good Yiddish kinder. It's not going to happen by itself. You can't trust the schools. Not because the schools are bad, because you can't trust anybody. The Hodev and the kinder, a Mr. and a Mrs., a Chassan and a Kala, and a husband and a wife, have to, like the Rebbe says in the Hayim Yem, have to talk about the Chinuch of their children all the time. And they have to constantly be Metachas Eitzer. If you have little kids, trust me, you don't got problems. When they're going to be big, you're going to have much bigger problems. But if you invest now, you Pashut will, in all likelihood, not have those problems. But you have to invest. You have to decide that this is the most important thing in my life. That my children should be Erlich, and Frum, and Yiddish, and Chassidish. This is Chinuch. This is Chinuch. The Rabbeim, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe were Meiser Nefesh for children. The amount of time that Rebbe spent with kids is not normal. So nicht normal. You're talking about a Yid, Elikus, Mamish, Elikus, angetan an a Guf, a Ga'an a Ga'oinim, a Ga'an a Nigel, this was nicht gewinn, als hunderte Jahre nachher. And he sits und es gießt sich Teire, und seine Fies spielen sich Kinder. Adin Even Yisrael, the Rebbe told him to change his name. And you listen to the Rebbe, Adin Even Yisrael. He was like, Adin Even Yisrael was a Gadol Yisrael. He was a Gadol Yisrael. In a different universe, is a Gadol Yisrael. And never given about Shiva, Rachman from Eliezer, which is the biggest thing in the world. That strike one and strike two. Yeah. DNA Mishal was a gon she'en komoyu. He was an incredible person. And the accomplishments that this man is unbelievable. It's not to be believed he accomplished. He would come to 770. I remember, I was a boy, and Bechlal, I wanted to see personalities. When I was a boch in yeshiva, when it came to the Pagra, I would look for the shluchim. I would look for the people in Lubavitch who were Shem Dovers. I remember I wanted to push it, look at Mullah Zimov. Mullah Zimov, most successful shliach in the world. In 770, he was a scoop on the dresses. He was a Shvat. That's how he felt about himself. And I wanted to see Epis. There was nothing to see. Adina Yisrael came to the Rebbe more often than you think. He was not quite often. He was a big man. He was a great man. And he was a Weltzman. He was very well respected. He was very well known. And Lubavitcher Chassidim and him had a funny relationship. At the Gewalken Zibitzig in 770, he was mamish. People elbowed him. I watched it. He was a small little man. He wasn't a big, strong guy. Elbow ahin, he was a great man. And in 770, he was a nobody. And this was that they found him a place behind the Rebbe. By Farbrengen, there was a shtickle seidin. During davening, I remember we were standing in the shul with him gestupt like nothing. But during Farbrengen, he wasn't a poshterid. He stood behind the Rebbe. I don't think of it always was, but in the later years, behind the Rebbe. And he has a book. Adin Evan Yisrael has a book which he calls My Rebbe. And that's exactly what it is. It's not about the Rebbe, it's about his Rebbe. And one of the things that blows his mind is the children. Here's a picture of the Rebbe sitting. You can't see the Rebbe, because the Rebbe's back is to the picture, and all around the Rebbe is Chinuch. And you have to know him. He was a Baal Seichel. He was a Chochem. He's a person who lived in ideas. What happened if a little kid came next to him and bumped into him? He was mavalbal him. What happened if a little kid sat down at the next table and started to play Chumash, looking for the Pays and the Veis and the Samachs and the upside down Aleph to get 2,000 points? It was a Machem Tumel. They disturbed him. Kinder than a Kinder. And the Rebbe is surrounded by children und sie baden him nicht. They don't disturb him, they don't bother him. There was absolutely no generation gap. The kids sit around the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, so you know a child once, tied the Rebbe's shoelaces to each other. So Meister Shahaya, he was, the kids would sit on the Rebbe's table. After that, they made a gzeda. They could sit around the Rebbe, but a child took the shlichel from one shoe, and the shlichel from the other shoe, and tied them together. The Rebbe had to go to Minch, he couldn't walk. I don't think the Rebbe bent down and he untied his shoes and the Shabbos afternoon after Farbrengen. See, he got out of shul, whatever it was. And it was decided that the kids can't sit under the table. What did they do with the child? They shot him. There was the Rebbe's Yibige Gemakai to children. The Matzev, the Maimed of Tashmam Aleph. Where the Rebbe made Tzivus Hashem. And the Rebbe danced with the kids. I was already after Bar Mitzvah. But the guy's just a couple minutes younger. The Rebbe is dancing with the kids, by himself. The Rebbe with the Kinder. The Rebbe gave unbelievable koichas to the children. Unbelievable koichas to the children. Because, I don't need you to say this. I'm all looking at Satan. Who have heard of a Rebbe with little kids? The Chabad Rabbeim did not see children. In Lubavitch, they never brought kids. They didn't bring children. They didn't bring women. You come here, and the Rebbe is everybody's Rebbe, Favos, because everybody needs him, and he needs to give what he has to give to every single Jew. We are parents. We're a father and a mother. We must, if you want a takeaway from your Shvat, go home to your wife and say, we need to become more conscientious about Chinuch. Not nervous, not angry, like a rabbi once said in a speech. Don't become OCD. But we need to start appreciating that our children need to see from us that this is more important than the vacation. It's more important than the house in the mountains. The most important thing is Teiru Mitzvahs. And we have to work together with our spouse to find ways of planting seeds in our children when they're little. That as they grow up, that they get the message of what we value. Not what we want from them. what we value, what we consider important. And if we teach our children that this is what we value, when they'll grow up, they'll value the same thing. And I'm saying this with ganz nemes. I wrote a list of speeches. I don't know if I'm going to get to all of them. Farbrengen, aber once weißt du, Nessa Teva Zeis Bisol. I don't agree with that. It's a very appropriate topic for Farbrengen and Shvat to speak about Chinuch. Why? Because the Rabbi lived there. Der große Rebbe hat sich auch gegeben mit kleinen Kindern. He was so concerned, not just about Lubavitcher children, about any Yiddish kid and any Meiser of Chinuch. He was so negeya. And you know, the Rebbe used to ask, when he would meet people from other kreisen, he would ask them how they mechanech their children. And he wasn't only asking because he wanted to criticize. He was trying to find maybe he could learn something from them, and he could incorporate it into a different model. We're not allowed to be young when we have our children, even though we all have our children when we're young. That's how there is to be in the world. We need to take responsibility. When our kids are small, we need to decide that we are going to make the Iker Kol Iker in our home Yiddishkeit. And the kids have to hear it, and the kids have to see it, and the kids have to experience it. Mitach Simcha or Mitach Ava. And I am telling you, you will never fight with your child about any issue if you prepare him. The bar mitzvah doesn't start when he's 12. You understand? It starts when he's 8. He starts preparing his maimer when he's 12. The business with learning is, I don't know where that comes from. But you want your child to learn Hilchos Tefillin. You can't learn Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't start when he's 12. It starts when he's a little boy. He hears what a Yid is. And then when he turns that age, it's a natural thing. But if until he's 12 years old, you don't want to mention it to him. And all of a sudden, boom, now you have to do this because it's not going to look good at the bar mitzvah. The Balabatim are going to come and you're not going to know the Bible. That's not what this is about. It's about raising our children. It's about raising our children. Okay, Chinuch Gelet. L'chaim l'brocha.
Rabbi Yitzchok, can I say something?
You can say two things.
From all what you said the last 15 minutes, from everything that you said the last 15 minutes, it's mamash, mosek, mitvash, and continue please, Chaim. What everybody is taking home and telling the wife now, this Shabbos I'm not taking the children to shul. So I want to say something. And Rabbi Paltiel told us. Okay? This is what Rabbi Paltiel said, and this is the headline of the Farbrengen, no more children in shul. So many times when the children cannot behave or cannot control themselves in shul, and this is the reason why you said in such a case they should stay home because it's not a pikuach nefesh, they should go to shul. But in maybe even a majority of the cases, the reason why some children are not behaving or controlling themselves in shul, that's because they don't have a dug nechaya from the parents. So the parents should work hard. The father should work hard not to talk by davening, to work hard to daven, to work hard to sit down every time in one place with a siddur, to try whatever he can, and the child will follow what he is doing. So not stay home and I will continue talking in shul and doing nothing.
Okay, Rabbi Weinfeld, now that you started up with me, I got to answer you. No. Ich darf dir nicht für das. Herr Beis, listen to me very carefully. I am not talking about what you're talking about. I'll explain to you the difference, and you'll tell me if you disagree. I'll tell you my story. Happened to me. How did I figure this chokhmah out? I lived on Carroll in Kingston, a stone's over 77. I had a 2-year-old boy. But say you're a Karingo. Ich habe genommen 77 Shabbos, noch ein stroke. There was no place to sit. No place to sit. The evening starts 10, it finishes 12:30, and he behaved for a very long time. After Kirzatayda, towards Musaf, he became restless, and I'm screaming at him, babe, far up, Sharon. Anyway, I got upset at my own son. And I'm walking home from shul, and it hit me, du idiot. You take a 2-year-old to shul, in 770s, no place for him to sit. I remember him sitting down on the floor, Pashat. He was always gematet. And so I came home to my wife, and I said to my wife, ich habe ihm genommen, dass nicht, was ihr gewollt. Ich habe genommen, dass gehabt hat, dass Chinuch. Ich bin ein Boychikel. Ich habe ihm gesagt, geht in Schul when they can't daven. My wife's a tzaddikus, so he stayed home till he was 6 or 7, and that was the language. In other words, I'm not telling you a philosophy. So I had this experience, and I had this epiphany. Shaita, you bring a 2-year-old to shul, of course it's not going to behave, and he behaved better than all 2-year-olds. He was a chassidish kid. He was a very nishan, sincere. People cannot get those halten. So I didn't take him until he was 6 or 7. I never had a problem with any of my children. They sat next to me by davening, by Kesat Torah. I don't think my children have any other kids. What I'm saying is, when you take babies to shul, now there's a place for it, you should know. The Rebbe spoke about it. I could bring you a raya to the Sheis my whole pilpul. People don't know this. The Rebbe did a groundbreaking. Hanocha 7 Apina, Yud Tes El Tafshin Memches. Du gedenkst das? Das ist gewend durch die Zolzer Rebbe. So the Rebbe did a groundbreaking. Right for Rosh Hashanah. And they built bathrooms, Baruch Hashem. That's the whole thing, so basic pieces that we get by. Wait. Hoshana Rabbe, I told you, what's the Shabbos? Shabbos was Sunday. No, the Shmini Atzeres was Monday and Tuesday. Hoshana Rabbe, the Rebbe spoke without a mic, but in the back of the shul you could hear there was a mic on quiet. It was right after Maide, it was for $1, and the Rebbe spoke. And mitamol the Rebbe ongame reden wegen 770. A month before the Rebbe did Melech Sapina, and apparently behind the scenes by the very, very important people there was a Chalukah Deis. What they're going to rebuild 770. They had plans to build from Eastern Parkway till Union and from Kingston till I don't know where. They wanted to buy all the properties and build a prachtige shul. So it was a Chalukah Deis what to do with the space. And apparently that saw that the Rebbe got that they should make a lot of offices. And the Rebbe said, "Da haben Plätze as Mames und können bringen die Wegelach. Da haben Plätze and the Kinder sollen können spielen." Then went on. There's a tape of it. You could get the tape. And like I always tell my students, please do not trust me. Go get the tape and listen for yourself. Mothers have to have a place to put carriages. Children have to have a place to run around and play. As the Rebbe gesagt. And the Rebbe hat mal gesagt in einer anderen Sicher. Was eine interessante Sache. Als Heint bringt man ältere Mädchen in Schul in SS Anoshim wie Amol. Amol, a Mädel nach a gewissen Gil is nicht going as the Rebbe says today. The Rebbe said that today you bring girls into the men's section, I don't know for what age, but past 3. The Rebbe said that. So you could bring me rayas to be safe to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like this. This is my personal experience, and this is what I have raised my kids. Children come to shul when they can value shul. Before that, they hear about shul. And shul's a special place. And shul you go to when you're kedaven. Because when you take little children to shul, and shul becomes a playground, when they grow up, it doesn't become always playground because they're older. To them, the shul is a playground. To me, it's common sense. Now, I understand, there are homes, there are couples where the wife pashat platzes. Sie kennen nicht. Maybe sie kennen nicht, that the man never the Kinder in shul. Verstehe. But that's not every home. Chinuch is very, very much individual. But the sheet of Chinuch is, children come to shul to daven. Not because you're mean to them and you're hard on them, because that's what a shul is for. You're teaching them what a shul is. And I think personally, and ich sage an andere Sache, was du sagst. Ja, you teach the children, when you're going to be old enough to daven, you'll come to shul. And then when they're not old enough, you'll go to shul. And when you can't sit anymore, your sister will take you home. Because to sit into a room life in the shul is not a good thing. And this is how you teach the kids. This is what I was saying. Verstehst? Jetzt geht's mit Abschluss.